UPCEA's latest marketing research today. You are getting the first peek at what and how your peer institutions are doing when it comes to all kinds of marketing metrics. You're going to see what they report for the most common metrics, including cost per lead, cost per enrolled student, spending on digital channels, and even how they're managing campaigns in terms of managing them in-house or outsourced. So I'm Paula French with Search Influence. We are an UPCEA Platinum Partner. My role at Search Influence is to work with universities and other clients before they become a client in order to set them up with a fruitful partnership with our agency. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Paula. It's such a pleasure to be part of this, and I want to thank Search Influence for sponsoring another study with UPCEA and being a great partner. One of the things that I always find very important is that, and I talk about this in my blog that's going to be coming out shortly, about how important information is, and it's especially important with our industry being in flux and the need for enrollments. And over my career, I've always been an advocate to having good information to make better decisions. And one of the numbers that always escapes us is, cost per lead, cost per student, and to be able to gather that and then be able to engage our peers within the UPCEA community to say, hey, what's your number? What's my number? Nobody really seems to have that number easily available. So we're really bringing that back up to the spotlight again for future discussions to allow us as a community to move forward. So it's my pleasure to be part of this. Jim Fong, Chief Research Officer at UPCEA, and been with UPCEA now for about 14 years in this capacity. So I'm going to hand it off to Bruce Etter to tell his story.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Hello, everyone. My name is Bruce Etter. I'm the Senior Director of Research and Consulting at UPCEA. Really, I was kind of the project manager for this initiative, and I'll be walking you through loads of different data points today, so I don't want you to get sick of my voice just yet. So with that, I'll pass it over to Alison.
Hey, everyone, and thank you, UPCEA and Paula, for including me in this webinar. I am the Director of Account Management at Search Influence. So I'm Paula's counterpart within our agency. So when she works with the clients, before they come on board, and then I and my team work with our higher ed and other clients after they come on board, kind of through their agency relationship with us. And so I have some experience with higher education clients, and in the last few years, really craved and kept seeking a cost per inquiry benchmark that was out there and that was trusted, and we really could never find one. So really excited about this research. I've been with the Search Influence and been a marketer for 13 to 15 years now, and really look forward to sharing some insights with y'all today.
Thanks, everybody. So just a tiny bit about Search Influence. As Jim said, we are the sponsor of this research, though all of the research was led and conducted by UPCEA. We are really a boutique SEO and digital marketing agency. We have been in existence for 18 years, and our focus is truly on SEO and targeted digital advertising supported by advanced analytics and tracking. And so that's why it was really important to us that our next study, you may have heard, you very likely heard about our SEO research study that we did with UPCEA last year. We really wanted to think about marketing metrics this year because, as Alison said, in our experience, the benchmarks just aren't there. And as you'll see, as Bruce goes through the research today, some of the sample sizes are pretty small for some of the metrics. And we totally expected that. We still think that the data is really, really valuable. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do it, even though we knew we'd have a small sample size, is to help people get comfortable with these metrics and to start tracking them. So we're hopeful that in future years to come, we'll get to redo this study, and the amount of people tracking cost per inquiry and tracking cost per enrolled student and all of these other metrics is going to continue to go up, and you will continue to receive, or you'll begin to receive better and better data as we go. And so just by being here, you have the chance to be one of 4 people that are going to win a $50 gift card. So thanks for coming today, whether it's for the gift card or because you're interested in the research. We're happy to have you, and we're going to announce that after our Q&A. So first we'll go through an introduction. We'll talk about the goal, the methodology, the demographics of the individuals that took the study. Bruce is going to go into those study results. We're going to talk about some takeaways. We'll of course have Q&A, and then we'll announce those winners after Q&A. So the first thing I want to talk about when looking at the introduction of our study, kind of gave a little bit of this lead up before, but our primary goal was to establish this trusted cost per inquiry and cost per enrolled student benchmarks. And again, if individuals are not tracking it, our secondary goal was to encourage universities to track those really important metrics. And I'll turn it over to Bruce.
All right. Thanks so much, Paula. And hello again, everyone. So, we're going to be talking a little bit more about the paper that's going to be released in the next couple of weeks, which has much more detailed methodology. But for the purpose of today's discussion, there's really just a handful of things that I want to highlight. So for this particular study, we focused on UPCEA members, and the study took place really from October to January. And that's a little bit longer of a timeline for us than we normally like to have. But really the driving force behind that was simply because we were trying to continue to drum up sample any way that we possibly could. And so in total, we had 96 individuals that participated in the study and 44 that completed the entire study. And so you'll see some interesting things in terms of where folks drop off throughout this. So before we dive into the results as a whole, I think it's important to understand the demographics of the individuals that actually participated and the institutions that they represent. So unsurprisingly, right, the majority of respondents are responsible for marketing at their institution's PCO unit or for marketing their PCO programs. This was intentional. We tried to do it this way. But for anyone that wasn't, so that 7% and that 3% there who are no or not sure, they were terminated from the study. They didn't meet the qualifications. So the titles here are interesting and ones that I want us to keep in mind later down the road, particularly when we kind of get into some of the perception questions. But so just over a third were marketing directors, managers, or specialists, another 20% executive senior directors, and then another 10% directors. So looking at this, these aren't entry-level folks. These are seasoned professionals who have been around for a while. And I think that makes some of this data even more compelling. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into some of the results. All righty. So we all know there's kind of this, endless abundance of metrics that can be tracked. But for this particular study, we really wanted to focus on 3 metrics. And so we'll start with the positive here, which I like to do. Almost 3/4, 73% of respondents track the source of their inquiries. And obviously, this is incredibly valuable information that can help inform and guide decision-making. But this data point alone doesn't really paint a complete picture. And what we saw is that less than half track cost per inquiry and even a slightly smaller percentage cost per enrolled student. So, it's great to know where folks came from. That's awesome. But if we don't know the costs associated with those inquiries, it kind of really limits our ability to produce realistic enrollment and budget projections. And this is particularly important when, every institution under the sun has 1,000 different people fighting for a finite number of resources. And so making sure we have some of these metrics to advocate for ourselves and advocate for our teams is critically important. So we saw who all or what's tracking, but I ask you, and I'm curious to see answers in the chat here, what percentage aren't tracking any of those 3 metrics? Any guesses? I'm curious, and we'll see how optimistic or pessimistic this group is. So go ahead and just populate some in the chat there. I'll give it a second. Here we go. We've got one. The chat's disabled. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that, Lacey. We will address that, and that kind of takes away from my big reveal, but we'll do it anyway. So the answer here, you wouldn't mind the next slide there, Paula. 17%. So 1 out of 5 are not tracking cost per inquiry. And that puts these institutions at a considerable disadvantage to their peers. As you could make the argument that some of these decisions are based on gut feel, right? And experience. But data really helps move that forward. And so as we continue through this presentation, keep that percentage in the back of your mind.
I'm going to add some context just real briefly here, but I'm going to be the old guy in the room. And I just remember an UPCEA study done probably 8 or 10 years ago where that where we had 45% that did not track their source of inquiries, enrollments, and whatsoever. So while 17% is a bad number, relatively speaking, at least we're making progress in a more digital and modern age. So I may jump in and out just to be the old guy and color commentary, Bruce, as needed.
Well, yeah, it's a great point, Jim. And it's great to see because we all know higher ed's known for moving quickly, right? So nonetheless, great to see some of those changes there. So Paul, let's go ahead and go to some of the actual data points here. So this first one is our cost per inquiry benchmark. And among our institutions that tracked overall cost per inquiry, we can see nearly a third had a cost per inquiry between $50 and $100, which I found rather encouraging. The average cost per inquiry was $140 with a mean of 106. Now, if we're looking at this slide, again, this is where our sample size is going to start to come a little bit more interesting. So we saw this 32%, but even of that, or 32 people, of that, 19% weren't sure, right? So I'm going to say this a couple different times, and I apologize for broken record syndrome here, but I think a lot of these metrics are really, really valuable indicators and guidelines rather than definitive bounds, right? Paula mentioned this on the front end. We're still really, really trying to isolate these things and track these things. And hopefully 2, 3, 4 years from now, when we run this study again, we'll be able to have a sample size of 100, something like that, and be a little bit more definitive in our answers there. So if we go to the next slide, the question becomes, what exactly are institutions including in their cost per inquiry expense calculation? And most often, and I think you can make the case most obvious, is media spend. 88% of respondents said media spend was included in their cost per inquiry for the 22-23 fiscal year. And 46 said it was based on all marketing expenses, not including salary. And I think that's a really important caveat. And then the last bit there, 39% said agency fees were included. And we're going to kind of dive into each of those a little bit further and a little bit deeper later on in this presentation. So this is where we start to get granular. Among PCO units that track the cost per inquiry, only 2/3, 64%, were able to isolate differences by credential or program types, right? So rather than this bucket that catches all, which is a great first step, only 2/3 who are actually tracking are able to go a little bit further. 21% cannot and 15% weren't sure. So among those that were able to tease things out in that more granular level, we saw non-credit programs had the lowest average cost per inquiry at $51, followed by undergraduate at $128 and graduate programs at $157. And again, while this sample size is admittedly small, I do think these are really valuable indicators. And I also think they kind of make inherent sense, right? I would expect to see non-credit programs cost the least, and then on to undergraduate, and then to graduate. So once more, really good indicators rather than definitive bounds. So with that, I want to turn it to our panel for a second, and we'll come back to some more data. But I'm curious, why should institutions track cost per inquiry?
Hey, Bruce, I'll chime in on that one. So, I think first and foremost, cost per inquiry really helps you measure whether you're making effective use of your marketing budget. Something that you just touched on in one of the earlier slides really stuck out to me. So I was making a note, which is that, with most institutions tracking by source, that's wonderful, but fewer are tracking their cost metrics, right? And where I think that shows some opportunity is that source tracking really helps you understand where to invest your marketing budget, right? Like, so these are the places that our interest is coming from, the sources that our interest is coming from, but tracking those cost metrics really helps you know how much you need to invest in those different sources. And so I think that's kind of the crux of it. We also know from our experience with clients that cost per inquiry and really cost CPE as well, is a metric that they often use to advocate for greater marketing budgets within the institution and get greater investment. So being able to show that you can effectively use the budget that you have and draw in interested prospects helps you then go advocate for, hey, if we can get more, look how much more we can do, because you're able to do projections and that sort of thing. I see Jim's off mute, so he probably has something to chime in.
Well, and I totally agree with you, Allison. And I think it's, at the macro level, we have to have these numbers so we can kind of back up and do some look at the historical numbers to do budget forecast and work with our finance people all interactively as opposed to episodically. And that's what I actually see at a lot of institutions. It's only once a year, 3 months before the fiscal year ends, all of a sudden the budget planning cycle happens and everybody starts gathering this data. This data should be an ongoing process, and it should be a real-time thing, in a perfect world, is to be able to get at cost per inquiry, cost per student, cost per applicant. And so I think that macro level need is there. But let me take it a step further. Where it becomes even more important, and where I've seen at a few institutions, is that among friends and among other staff, we know what these numbers are. But when we start going out into the academic community, suppose we have an MBA, and suppose we have a certificate program, suppose we have a high profile program that isn't expected to generate revenue, and you start looking at some of these numbers here, then a fight for resources happens. But then you can start actually making better decisions once you know what is the cost per inquiry here, what is the cost per student, what are our goals for these programs, and then in a very transparent environment, everybody sees this, and they don't start arm wrestling for resources, or they actually understand each other's goals more. So there's a lot of ways that you can do things, vertically, with leadership, but also horizontally with programs. And the other piece that I also see is the accountability factor in this is also very important. If you're tracking great metrics, you can actually go look at things longitudinally. How did I do last semester? How did I do last quarter? Where were we at a year ago? And be able to track these things. Otherwise, are you making a good decision based on $100, $104 per inquiry? Well, last year was $88. You actually have a benchmark or a baseline. So I think these are all very important in terms of this political environment and accountable market culture that we have within higher education.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. And I see we're starting to get some questions in the Q&A. So I want to ask Paula her first thought around the question from the anonymous attendee around calculating cost per inquiry as an average for all types of inquiry, or break it down by cost per inquiry by source. So this particular individual tracks digital ad source for cost per inquiry, but not for all types of inquiries.
Yeah, most common, we see it being tracked both ways. So there might be there would be a combined digital advertising CPI, and then you're also looking at CPI by source. And it's important to have different expectations for different sources for CPI. A Google paid search, potentially you're going to have a lower cost per inquiry than you would from a display ad, even if that display ad is on Facebook. But, I say that, but it can depend on your programs and the level of competition and your strategy for each of those platforms. But you definitely shouldn't. The reason I'm saying that is because you shouldn't say, oh, okay, well, we get a much, much lower cost per lead on this platform, so we should move all of our budget there, because it may be acceptable to be paying more for those other leads on that other platform, just because of the fact that the strategy is different and therefore the expectations are different.
And I want to add to that. I was telling Paula a story the other day that Bruce and I were working with one of our UPCEA members before the pandemic, and they were making decisions, and they were talking, and the question came up, and we were looking at their marketing metrics about whether or not they should be spending more on Google AdWords versus Bing and whatever. And they liked Bing because it had a greater international reach. In terms of the cost per inquiry there, it was basically, I think, 2 to 3 times more for those keywords to go over on Bing. And there wasn't any evidence that the international thing was actually true. It was all kind of just kind of a hypothesis or whatever that didn't prove out. So I think these are some things where you at least get the baseline measures to compare one platform versus the other.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Loved seeing the Q&A light up. That was great. So let's go ahead and keep on marching forward here. And there's a lot of other interesting stuff to get through. So this next piece is cost per enrolled student. Very similar to cost per inquiry. We also wanted to explore this. And respondents were evenly split between the lowest and highest values. So you can see that there we had 17% on the low side and 17% again on the high side. And the overall mean was 2,800. And this kind of relates to one of the questions in the Q&A, where really, of course, a PCO units, portfolio programs can vary wildly from institution to institution. And in the future, we'd love to be able to break things out at a more granular level. But as we detailed previously, you know, we first need to ensure that we're tracking some of these broader metrics before we can kind of get into that granular tactical level. So much like cost per inquiry, media spend was the most common cost at 89%, and nearly 2/3, 62%, said it was based on all marketing expenses. And this last little chunk there at the end, marketing team salaries, these were included on the cost per enrolled student, but not on the cost per inquiry, which I thought was interesting. And granted, again, very small, only 4%, but I still think noteworthy. So among PCO units that track cost per enrolled student, over half, 54%, are able to isolate the cost per enrolled student by different credential or program types, which is, again, less than the 64% that we saw earlier on the cost per inquiry side. I don't know, I feel like I'm going to trip on that one a couple of times. And again, I'll stress that these sample sizes are quite small, right? If we look at the non-credit side, we see an N value of 5. That's very, very small. So I just want to reinforce that these, again, are more indicators rather than definitive bounds. And so with some of these metrics in mind, I want to ask our panel again, how can institutions improve cost per student metrics?
So I'll take that for the search influence side. Really, when you're looking at cost per student, the first thing you should look at is cost per inquiry. And so if your cost per inquiry is out of line with either what you can't afford, what's out of line with the industry, that would be the first thing that we would recommend improving. That said, if your CPI is acceptable already, or if you can tackle, you know, the inquiries and down funnel metrics at the same time, the next step would be to look at those down funnel metrics and look at the conversion rate at each stage of the funnel and compare that to industry benchmarks, which UPCEA does have research on that as well, actually. And so that can help you figure out, you know, what the problem is at what stage, and figure out, you know, what are some levers that you can pull at each stages of the funnel.
Paula, can I follow up and ask a question from the chat here? I think that's related. Others include media spend and how they track cost per inquiry. Do you recommend including spending on media that's less trackable? So something like TV ads, I imagine billboards, you know, those sorts of things where we can't necessarily track the source. How do you approach something like that?
Typically, no. You might include that in cost per enrolled student. Like, so it all depends, and I think it depends on how you think about your spend. But typically, what we see is that really high level brand metrics like TV spending, billboards, bus shelters, all that good like out of home stuff would not be included in a cost per inquiry, but you may look at it at a cost per enrolled student.
So I'm going to ask Paula, you know, how did she feel about the previous slide first before I comment about how could we improve costs per student metrics? Paula, what did you think about, even though this small sample size, you know, are these out of line? Are they in range? Because I know you work with a number of institutions. Personally, I kind of feel some of it has to do with maturity of the marketing effort as well. You know, if you're marketing this thing over 5 years, you have a good sense of what that metric of cost per inquiry, cost per student is accurate within the range. What are your thoughts about some of these numbers?
Yeah, the number that we have most frequently for our clients that I feel like I can give a better answer on is cost per inquiry, since cost per enrolled student can, it just takes a lot more to get to that. And so I actually felt really good about these benchmarks that we got. One, at first I thought, that's lower than I thought it was going to be. But then when I coupled that with the fact that it is only a subset of universities that are tracking it, the story I'm telling myself is that those who are tracking it are working to improve it. And so the ones who are tracking it are a little bit more sophisticated, and therefore they probably have the means and the resources to be able to bring it down as well. But in our experience for our clients that we have been tracking CPI for a long time, this is in the range that we generally see. Might go up, might go down, depending on optimizations that we're making, but this is in the general range we see. And then the other thing that stuck out to me was that made me feel really good about the quality of the information despite the sample size was the how undergraduate programs at 128 as the average, graduates a little bit more at 157, and then non-credit is a good bit lower. That made sense to me. And so again, despite those sample sizes, that's something that made me feel really good about the quality of the information that we're presenting.
Yeah, as the law of averages goes here, I would agree with you. I think that those numbers feel generally good. I think as an institution, you've got to look at these numbers and you've got to say, okay, does that look good for me? Is that, as I get more experience with this, what is history telling me? And I know that there's a lot of really seasoned marketers in our community, and then there's a lot of new marketers. And then but I think one thing that we've got to start incorporating, these should be regular metrics. These should be, I know real time is real hard to get at, but they should be as real time as you can make it, without obviously detracting from the other responsibilities of your job. The other thing that you mentioned, Paul, that's really important in all this here is, and this relates to a different study that we're doing, but I don't want to detract too much, is that, having your funnel metrics. And I know that we have a statistic in another study. And Bruce, is that study available to the UPCEA community at this point?
It is, yes.
It's the Inside Track funnel study?
Correct.
Okay, well, you need to look for that one, because that one coupled with this one, we're looking at conversion rates, from the inquiry level to the applicant level to the student level at the credit and non-credit side. That should be a regular part of your reporting kind of infrastructure or process there. It shouldn't be a once a year kind of thing. And you should be able to do that at the program level to say, hey, our funnel metrics for program A are, 11% from inquiry to student, versus program B where it's 27%. These, having these statistics over time, helps you make better decisions as opposed to guessing. And then, once you've kind of established that, then to go up to the UPCEA community and say, hey, University X, would you partner with me and share your statistics or whatever? And I think that's when these numbers can have so much greater value.
Yeah, and I imagine, hopefully we don't, but I imagine a few folks will have to drop you off here at the half hour. So I wanted to ask Alison about a question from an anonymous attendee about how you account for costs associated with student communication, engagement tactics, recruitment events, etc. I'm curious how you approach that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question that, obviously we are sitting in the marketing seat, right? So if I'm being honest, the experience that we have with our clients is that we're really looking at these cost per metrics with the marketing investment specifically in mind, because they are marketing metrics. Now, could you incorporate those additional costs and come up with some larger cost per enrollment, cost per student? You absolutely could do that. I think generally speaking, though, I would look at that as a different metric, because the majority of what we've seen is that people tend to look at cost per inquiry and cost per enrolled student as a marketing metric specifically. And so, while you're right, it definitely could be missing some of that additional investment. I think sometimes those might be seen kind of as like overhead, like these are things that have to happen regardless. And so they don't necessarily incorporate those into those marketing metrics.
Hey, Bruce, can I answer Francois LaChapelle's question there?
Please.
So Francois asked a question about non-credit continuing professional education there, and about how the CPI is on the low side, and do we anticipate that either growing or increasing over time given the efforts or the investments being made into that area? And I would assume yes. And that number is small at this point as an average here. I think it's a starting point for the most part. I would love to see us collect more data on that, because we're making the assumption right now that non-credit education is generally less costly or generates less revenue or is in smaller modules compared to credit education. On the other hand, we have non-credit education that could be executive education or boot camps that could be $5,000, $6,000, $10,000, in terms of those programs. Having a cost per inquiry on a larger program is going to be much more acceptable and palatable, as we move forward here. I think that's something we have to track over time and be able to learn as a community again, because I don't want to say spend $54 on a cost per inquiry for a boot camp that costs $15,000, or an engineering radar program, on site, non-credit, that costs $20,000. I mean, I think these are all things that we've got to look at respectively. But I think overall, in terms of the trend toward professional education, we've got to start looking at and measuring it and tracking it over time to see whether or not it's being profitable. And it's not being profitable, is it populating other program streams such as degree completion and other things like that? Does it have value there? But again, we're early in that stage right now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. All righty, jumping along here, getting into some of the kind of other nuts and bolts, if you will, before we start moving into the perception side of things. In the 22-23 fiscal year, 40% of PC units had a digital advertising media spend between 100 and 500K, while nearly a fifth, 19%, spent over $1 million. So obviously we're talking about institutions with wildly different portfolios and wildly different amounts of resources, right? But on average, we saw PC-only units spend $800,970 with a median of $350. And as we saw earlier, the costs associated with digital media spend heavily influence cost per inquiry and cost per enrolled student metrics. So looking at some of the campaigns, and admittedly, I know there's a lot going on in this figure, and when the paper comes out, it'll be a lot, you'll be able to get a little closer, But what this is showing really is how various campaigns are managed. So email marketing had 73% that were managed exclusively in-house. Search engine optimization, 4%. And these are most often, the email was the highest of any group. On the flip side, we had exclusive outsourcing most common for Google paid search at 50% and digital display for 46%. And what we'll see on this next slide related to that is very interesting and not surprising. So we saw recently, well, I'll go off my notes. I won't go offhand here. So PCO units spent the most on Google paid search advertising with an average of $344,346, and a median of $190,000. And as we saw in that last slide, half of all respondents said their PCO unit exclusively outsources Google paid search, which was the most of any campaign type, right? So that makes inherent sense that that would have the highest dollar amount spent. On the flip side, the least amount was spent on email marketing with an average of just under $2,700. Recall that we saw 73% of email marketing is managed exclusively in-house, which was the highest of any campaign type. So once more, it makes sense that we would see the lowest costs associated with them. But just because things cost a lot or don't cost a lot, doesn't mean they're going to generate the most or the least leads, right? So if we follow this next slide, we see that the highest number of leads were actually generated through Meta, which, Facebook, Instagram, at 6,400 on average, followed by Google paid search, and then LinkedIn paid search. So, I think to me, what this really gets at is, can we develop those ratios, right? So let's say email marketing is our least expensive. Are we also getting the most bang for our buck in terms of cost to lead ratio? If not, maybe it's Google, maybe it is Meta. But we need to figure out some of those things to make sure that we are telling a complete and entire picture there. So I'm going to turn it back to my friends who are the panel once more and ask, what surprised you about the findings around campaign management, spending, and leads? And I'm also curious to hear from the audience here as well.
I'll go first, but I'll take that one, Alison, for the search influence side. So the fact that so many people are spending so much on paid search, but they're not investing in SEO continues to surprise us. We had always felt this anecdotally because we talked to a lot of universities and, we understand a lot of the marketing mix that they have out there. And this data really reinforced that. And so we also found this in our SEO research study last year. And so we know that people believe in search. You wouldn't be investing as much as you are in search if it wasn't for the belief in it. But what that means is that there's a big part of the search engine results page that most universities are not paying attention to. And so SEO can really go a long way in getting qualified prospects to your site, in addition to helping them find the information that they need faster. So ultimately, this improve conversion rates and also can just simply improve their satisfaction of their experience. And that's really for both prospects and current students. So it is about driving more qualified people to your site, and it's also about giving them a better experience.
Jim or Allison, what thoughts do you have?
I think Paula really nailed it, and then also kind of touched on some of the things that I was surprised about earlier through some of our prior discussions. So nothing new to add here, but I do want to underscore that SEO point. I mean, we have seen for clients that we've worked with that SEO and organic search drives often a majority of their leads when they're actively optimizing, right? And when they're not, you'll see figures that look a lot more like your bar chart, where a lot of the leads are coming from paid advertising and not from organic. So it's definitely an area of opportunity for a ton of universities.
I don't really have a lot more to offer. I think Paula and Allison nailed it pretty well here. Only thing I'd suggest here is just referencing the previous search influence study here, because it's one of my favorite studies, to be honest with you. It is very eye-opening, and I use it all the time. And then with any engagement I have on the marketing side with an institution, I spend time looking at their site. I spend time trying to be the student here, and I think that plays a lot in terms of in terms of the whole enrollment funnel, but also how much does it cost per student and inquirer there. You can get those numbers down much lower if you clean up things or if you fix things. Bruce and I had a conversation with a major institution a few days ago, and I decided to secret shop them. And I had one institution that they were kind of quasi competing with respond to me in a matter of an hour, and then I had another one. It took 2.5 days before they got back to me, and the messaging was very, very different. So I think and also the experience I had on these two comparative sites was very, very different as well. One, I felt a little warmer and welcomed compared to the other. So I think all of these things play into your CPI and your CPS numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the SEO study that Jim is mentioning, on your toolbar on Zoom, there is a button towards the bottom right that says resources that has a few pages on there. You can find the SEO research study. It should be showing as the middle resource. It's titled Slipping Through the Cracks, Understanding PCO Unit SEO Capabilities. And then there's a couple of other resources in there as well. So the one that isn't mentioned, the one that's not there, is the Inside Track funnel metrics study. Is that something that you can pull up easily, Bruce, and we could share it in the chat?
Yeah, I can do that. I can pull that up when we get to the Q&A. The other thing I'll note too is for UPCEA members, we also have a marketing survey that has data that we keep in-house. We only keep it for our members. So Chris and E, to your question about is there data on spending versus number of programs, not as it relates to cost per inquiry, but yes, we do have some of those metrics in our other studies. And then Kristen Brown, if it's Kristen Brown, who I think I know, it's great to see you again or read your content. But I'm curious as to the team's thoughts on her question. And really, it's more from an institutional lens. So maybe thinking about Paula and Allison, some of the clients you work with, but they don't have the staff to create content for SEO. So, how have you seen institutions that are maybe resource strapped, personnel strapped, go about that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, if you can find the budget to hire an agency, then that would be the best way, the best way to do that. And so an agency like ours can work with your team to, pull the information that you have about your programs, about your differentiators, all those things, and combine that with the SEO best practices to make that content the best it can be from an SEO perspective, so that it can really do the things that you ultimately want it to do. We actually have a blog post that we published recently of essentially like how to get your boss on board with investing in SEO. So that's another good resource from the Search Influence website.
Yeah, and the only other thing, I was going to say the same thing. I didn't want to sound too self-serving in that answer, but hiring a specialist and a team who really knows about SEO can really make the best use of the resources that you have. But also I did just want to add one other thing, which is that I do kind of notice there's a common perception that SEO equals content. And while that is true, SEO equals more than just content too, right? There's so much about technical settings of your website, what's happening off your site, and how your brand is mentioned and linked and all of those things. And so if you don't have the resources internally to do content, then you're probably also not, or you might also be neglecting, some of those other things. And that's again why I think, people who are in that industry and in an industry that's often changing as SEO is, it's important to get the right people in the right seat to do some of that work for you.
And building off what Alison said, I think half of the SEO battle is when you start designing your pages, your technical people, can do some basic things. I mean, when we worked on the study last year that we referenced, we found a lot of basics that were missing. It came into meta language that some of your program people could be working on, your technical people here, and just certain layouts and then link authority as another one here. Are you linking to the right pages or not? I mean, there's a lot of things I think that can be, half the things you can do on your own and improve your SEO rankings and your scoring here. And we just kind of think that you ought to, I mean, we have to build that into the culture when we design pages. Basically, things need to be done, and you can establish that, and the people that you already have designing pages can do a lot of it. They're just choosing or avoiding doing some of it.
One last quick note on that, which is that if one of the things that's holding you back from, doing SEO within your institution is just, kind of knowing how to get started or knowing what you need to tackle, you can also work with either an agency, or there's certainly tools out there to help you do a bit of an audit. And, we do audits for our clients often, in which case we're checking a ton of things that matter for SEO. And then we're outlining specifically, okay, here's what needs to be done differently and what needs to be tackled in what priority order. So that's another way that could kind of get you over the hump to really get into SEO and start being, deal with the things that are problems and then start being a little more proactive, because that type of experience is also very educational.
Wonderful. I'm loving how engaged everybody is. This is awesome. All righty. So moving along here to our last couple of slides, the last half of the study, or maybe not last bit of the study is really focused on perceptions rather than hard and fast metrics, right? And some of these data points, at least to me, were really surprising. Less than half of the respondents, 47%, strongly agree that they're satisfied with the performance of their marketing campaigns. So if we think back to the demographic slide, we saw many of these individuals are marketing directors, marketing managers, right? These are the folks that are tasked with executing these things. And if they're not satisfied, that tells us a tremendous amount, right? And I think much of the dissatisfaction comes from the inability to track the success of campaigns, right? So just under half, 45%, very similar percentage, disagreed or strongly disagreed that they are satisfied with their ability to track the success of their campaigns, right? So I think, there's a very clear correlation, which we'll show on this next slide and the last kind of data slide. And so this slide shows the impact of satisfaction in tracking campaigns and satisfaction of marketing campaign performance, right? So as you can see, there's a very clear positive relationship between those that are satisfied with their ability to track campaigns and their satisfaction with their campaigns. So to me, this chart really just reinforces the notion, this webinar title, what gets measured gets managed, right? And has better satisfaction. So with that, I'll turn back to my panel once more. And what do you see as the most important takeaway from this research? A very open-ended question, I know.
Well, I guess from my perspective here is that, I'm all about measurement, and I'm a nerd. I'm a data person, and I just, it helps guide those decisions here. It helps guide budgets. And it shouldn't be a once a year kind of thing here. It should be integrated within your culture. And for those of you that are, that are resource constrained and that you need staff to do a lot of this here, I think this is part of a growth plan as well, that, if you do these things, you have greater evidence and numbers to start supporting investments into the future regarding staff and infrastructures and systems and additional spending. I always find it, you've got to yell pretty loud to get resources and help. Otherwise, it's really hard to grow without tracking metrics. So it's something that it may feel like a luxury, but I feel like it's a necessity. And you may actually have to start experimenting to do so. Start tracking certain things or one program to see whether or not the needle is being moved over time. Then add another program, and ultimately, can you add resources and to become to make this more real time. I guess that's my biggest takeaway from this, because I'm very excited about this. I've had, while I've been with UPCEA for 14 years or so, I was at Penn State before that, and I've watched the evolution and the lack of marketing data 20, 25 years ago to where we're at today, and what's being made and decisions that are being made. And I'm very excited to be able to have us have that more part of our culture, so we can actually work better as a community together.
Yeah, I think, the really, we wanted to illustrate this graphically because the positive spin of what Bruce said is that there really is evidence that shows that tracking is going to ultimately drive performance and satisfaction. And so the analysis really indicates that it is critical that you track these metrics if you want to improve it. And so this whole idea, like Bruce said, of what gets measured gets managed, people always say that, but now you have the data to really ultimately prove that. And so if you're tracking your cost per inquiry and cost per enrolled student, you're going to begin to evaluate those things. You're going to be able to make those strategic adjustments, which is ultimately going to improve results and improve, your satisfaction, your team's satisfaction, and, your stakeholder satisfaction as well. Anybody else have anything to add to that? If not, I'll move to the next slide. Okay. All right, and then the final slide that we wanted to share with you is that, given only 38% are satisfied with their cost per inquiry and 27% aren't sure, that's a lot of people that either aren't satisfied or aren't sure if they're satisfied. The benchmark is going to help you have some of that confidence ultimately. So number one is that you need to start tracking your cost per inquiry if you aren't doing it yet. In the resources, there is a CPI worksheet that can help you calculate your cost per inquiry a little bit more easily. Then you want to integrate benchmarks into your reporting dashboards and into your human analysis. So as Jim was saying, for yourself, don't look at it just once a year. Well, don't only look at the benchmark once a year as well. And so kind of integrate that into your thinking and say, how are we doing against these guides that we now have available to us to help you make some better decisions? Like I said before, it's going to ultimately grow your confidence in the results that you're delivering, because you will have something to compare it to and you can say, oh yeah, okay, we are doing pretty good. And if not, it can drive your ability to really say, no, y'all, this isn't good. We really do need to make some changes. And so it can help you push for some of those strategic adjustments maybe that you've been wanting to push for in the past. And then finally, as Alison was saying, leverage this information in your budget discussions to show your efficiency. So it should help you, make a case for additional marketing budget or additional marketing resources where appropriate. And so we would jump into Q&A now. We don't have any open questions at the moment. So I think we might be good. We got a lot of questions throughout. Like Bruce said, it was really awesome to see the engagement throughout the whole webinar. And so all registrants will be emailed the full report in 2 to 3 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. The recording of this webinar will also go out to you automatically about an hour after it ends. So you'll have that available to you between now and then. And then lastly, we're going to announce our winners. So the winners of our 4 $50 gift cards. First, we have Vicki Cook. Then we have Nick Elms, Kelly Berkey, and Jennifer Swangler. So we'll be emailing you about getting your gift card. It'll all be digital. It goes onto a website called Tango where you can pick from a huge wide variety of gift cards. And if for some reason you aren't able to accept gifts of that kind, you can submit it as a donation to the cause of your choice on that website. So that's a really neat tool that we found. So thanks so much, everybody. We really appreciate you coming today. Brand new research. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Jim, for all the work that you've done to get this out there. I think this is going to be a really, really helpful resource for our marketers.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you all so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Great to be a part of this.